In the years after Jesus, significant parts of the Christian tradition began to move away from a focus on his life and his teachings, those parts that have always been most significant to our Unitarian Universalist tradition, and began to move toward debates over the meaning of his death. A famous distillation of this shift appropriate for Christmas is found in a line from T.S. Eliot's poem, Journey of the Magi. That's worth reading in full if you haven't read that in a while. Eliot imagines the Magi asking themselves a question about why it is that they had followed this fabled star to visit a child. They asked, "Were we led all this way for birth or for death?" Christmas answers that the Magi were led all of that way for birth. The celebration of Christmas is about the incarnation, literally the enfleshment. It's the story of a baby who grew up to be one among many examples in the world's religions of what it can look like when the divine powerfully manifests in an embodied human life. Many celebrations of Easter, however, give the opposite answer, that the Magi were actually led all that way for death, that was ultimately the point. It would just take a few years. But if you want a UU take on that, you'll have to come back in March for Easter Sunday. The upshot is that over the years, the Christian tradition has become most famously symbolized by the cross. There's a lot of problems with that, but I can't completely unpack that right now. But each December, Christmas challenges us that a more important symbol for Christianity may be not the cross, but the creche, the scene of Jesus' birth. Were we led all that way for birth or death? Since Megan and I have a 6-month-old at home, I've been thinking a lot about birth this Christmas. And in preparation for this Christmas Eve service, I've been reading a recently published book titled Natality, Toward a Philosophy of Birth. It's by Jennifer Banks. She's an author at Yale University Press, and she makes a really interesting argument, I think quite appropriate for Christmas, that we humans should focus at least as much, if not more, on natality and birth as we do on mortality and death. On the one hand, of course there is deep wisdom in all those mostly male philosophers and theologians and sages who have all urged us to remember your mortality as this key for motivating us to make the most of our finite lives. Sure, there's wisdom in that. On the other hand, Banks argues that from a feminist perspective, we are missing an equally deep well of wisdom if we fail to reverse our perspective and also remember our natality, our birth. Consider these examples of what it might look like to flip the script on some of those traditional proverbs about mortality to focus instead on natality. As I read, notice if one or more of these few prompts, there's going to be about 5 of them, just notice if one or more of them just really resonates with you in particular, because that might be an indication there's some wisdom in there for you this Christmas. From the time we are born, we are being shaped by birth. Study birth always. It takes an entire lifetime to learn how to give birth or to come to terms with having been born. Keep birth daily before your eyes. Birth is evidence of our freedom. The fundamental purpose of art is to process the strange, painful, and miraculous experience of birth. That's really interesting. Take a little tour down our art gallery later and think about that the fundamental purpose of art might be the strange, painful, and miraculous experience of birth and processing that. And finally, the great philosophers are those who practice being born and birthing. Keep in mind, of course, as one of our readings reminded us earlier, that natality is about far more than just literally giving birth, although that is, of course, important too. Metaphorically, it's also about acts of creativity and invention and caring. We give birth when we create with our hands, offer hospitality, work for justice, or teach a child. We share in giving birth when we freely offer ourselves to heal others, for delight, for transformation, for peace, and so much more. Brooks's book continues by exploring the themes of natality in the work of Hannah Arendt, of Friedrich Nietzsche, of Mary Wollstonecraft, Mary Shelley, Sojourner Truth, Adrienne Rich, and Toni Morrison. Check it out if this brief sermon leaves you curious to learn more. For tonight, I will share with you only a few reflections from Hannah Arendt, one of the most influential political philosophers of the 20th century. Arendt is the one who actually coined that term, natality. And her original meaning was about so much more, again, than whether someone has a child. Indeed, Arendt chose not to have children herself for a confluence of reasons. As a philosopher who studied how to resist oppressive political movements, something pretty important, actually, in our world, and we're going to revisit Arendt in April, Arendt emphasized natality as a reminder that no matter how bad things get for us personally, in the world, we humans are always capable of beginning again, of starting something new. It's never too late for that. There is tremendous hope and potential in natality, and it is freshly available to us in the birth of every new present moment, again and again and again. For Arendt, that makes natality the single most prized of our human capabilities. This Christmas and the coming new year, I invite you to also consider what wisdom, what inspiration might there be for you in natality. Study birth, always. It takes an entire lifetime to learn how to come to terms with the fact that we were born. Birth is evidence of our freedom. Practice being born and birthing. Christmas is ultimately about so much more than the birth of Jesus. As we sang in our chalice lighting, the deeper meaning of Christmas is that each night a child is born is a holy night. With each birth, very much including each one of us, something uniquely new came into the world. And in every new present moment, we have an opportunity for just a little rebirth. A chance to nudge ourselves, others, and the world towards even just a little more hope or love or peace or joy. Now, don't get me wrong, there's room at the end for all the other emotions too. The lesson here is not toxic positivity, right? To everything there is a season. And in this Christmas season, when we are invited to remember the birth of a tiny baby named Jesus who came to change the world in unexpected ways, may even just a little more hope or peace or love or joy be born in you this night and in the nights to come. You can remain seated as we sing together, O Little Town of Bethlehem.